So in this video, I'm making a marking knife for my buddy. Right now, I'm just annealing the file, which means heating it up to remove the hardness so that I can work it. Now I'm using my angle grinder with just a grinding disc on it in order to remove the teeth from the file, because obviously I don't want that on the knife. Now I'm making some layout marks so that way I can cut the knife point. I'm going to do a double-sided point so that way this can be used left-handed or right-handed, so if you're marking dovetails or something like that, it's really easy to mark both sides. Now I'm just using the grinding disc on my angle grinder to establish the bevel on the blade. Now it's really important here that I don't heat the metal too much while grinding so that way it doesn't warp on me. Now I'm just using a mill bastard file in order to further refine the shape. I'm making sure the bevels are really smooth because my angle grinder technique isn't very good. And now I'm just rounding off the top of it for aesthetics. I really didn't like the sharp corners on the top, so it gives it a more elegant appearance, I think. And now for the heat treating, I'm just going to heat this up until it's red hot and loses magnetism, and then quench it in water. And after this step, I'm going to move on to tempering, and to temper it, I'm going to put it in an oven at 400 degrees for an hour and then take it out. I learned that tempering after you heat treat is very critical. This is actually the second iteration on this piece of steel for trying to make this knife. The first time I didn't temper it and chipped it, so I had to regrind it. And now I'm just using that file after the heat treating to make sure that it did take the heat treating. As you can see, the file was just skating over the top of it. So that means that the heat treating worked. And now that it's been through that process, it's got all this scale on it. So I took it to my belt grinder with I believe 120 grit pad on it just to remove most of it. And now I'm wrapping a piece of 220 grit paper to further polish this up and just get it down to a better surface. You can see I used a block of wood there as a sanding backer, so that way my sanding would be more effective. And now I'm just cutting the tip of this off. Obviously not going to use the whole file, so just removing the bit of metal that I need for the marking knife. I didn't want to drop it, so I used the angle grinder, cut most of the way through it, and then pinched it off with the pliers. Now I'm using a piece of Lignum Vitae that I had left over from making a pepper mill, and I'm using that in order to make the handle. After I cut it down to size, I used the bandsaw to rough cut out the slot that I needed, and now I'm just using a file the exact same size as the file I made the knife out of in order to file the slot down to the perfect size to fit the tip. You can see you got a pretty nice fit. So I took the steel back out and I wanted some shape on the wood where the blade is going to be, and it's a lot easier to do that without the blade in it. So I took it back out and did some initial shaping, and then I taped the blade into the handle and drilled the first hole so I can epoxy this in with some 5-minute epoxy and set the first brass pin, which is going to hold it in place. I gave it a few minutes to cure and set, and then I went and drilled the second hole for the second pin, and then I just glued in that second brass pin exactly the same as I did the first one. Now I've got this clamped in the vise and just using that file again to file off all the excess from the brass pins. I like leaving those extra long and being able to file them down to size, and just doing some rough shaping with the file, trying to take off all the extra epoxy. And now I'm doing the shaping on the handle over at my belt sander. Of course, this was probably the longest process of the whole thing. Probably spent well over an hour, hour and a half total, just standing at the sander, sanding either the blade and trying to get a good polish on it, or getting the handle down to a good shape. It's a whole lot of just sand and check, sand and check, sand and check until you get a shape you're pleased with. And now I'm going to wrap this in cloth and clamp it in my vise so that way I can use a razor knife to scratch off the excess epoxy that's squeezed out. Now I really should have done this before I did the sanding, but I didn't think of it, then realized after the fact that I still had all this ugly epoxy hanging out on there. So I just scraped that off. And now I'm on to sharpening the blade. I have two-sided stones, so I basically work it from, I believe, a 400 and an 800 grit to 1,000 grit, and then my finest stone I just use there is 8,000 grit. And I flatten the back and also work both the bevels, and then I always like to finish off my sharpening on a leather strop, and this is just a piece of 6-ounce leather, I believe, that I glued down to a piece of red oak that I have, and I like to take at least 60 strokes on the strop for each side. So I do both bevels, and then I flatten the back with it too, just to try to remove that wire edge, any burr that might be hanging out. And now I'm just showing off the mirror polish you can get. If you don't use a leather strop when you're sharpening, I really recommend it. It just adds a nice edge to it. And now is the obligatory hair shaving shot, showing that this thing really is razor sharp. And it is a marking knife, so just want to show that it does mark, and had to do this freeze frame because I love the great mirror finish on the back. You can see it leaves a nice crisp line. And with Lignum Vitae, it's a really oily wood, so I didn't want to use another oil on it, so I just used some paste wax, and I would rubbed it in a lot, left some excess on it, would let it dry for a while, and then buff it out, and then reapply. I did that about 3 times, and that will leave a pretty good finish on it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, like, and comment, and if you love this video, please tell a friend, and if you really hated it, please tell a friend. Thank you.